Hello, welcome to Miniature Realms. My name's Stuart and welcome to maybe a slightly more unusual video than something I'd normally do. And probably a video aimed very much at existing subscribers, really, people that know the processes that I use with painting some of the models that are focused on the channel a lot of that being smaller scale miniatures like these Warlord games, Epic Battles, Napoleonics and American Civil War. And the process I use for painting them, and I've done lots of tutorials on the channel, and I've used contrast paints over a zenithal pre-shade highlight, and that's formed a large part of the channel really over the last year. And I get lots of questions around what paints to use, how I would achieve the same things that I've been doing in my videos, and that's why I do it really. And there's been loads and loads of questions about the Army Painter Speed Paint, which is their own version of Citadel contrast really. Had lots of chats around them in the comments on my videos, so I've been looking forward to get hold of some for a while, and I've had these now for about a month. I've played around with them a little bit, and I thought what I'd do is talk you through some of my thoughts on them while actually doing a little bit of painting. It's probably something I should have done as at a bit of a live stream or something like that, engaged, but I haven't got time for that at the moment. But I thought I'm going to do a little bit of hobby. I'm going to be using some speed paints and that, and I thought I'd talk you through some of my initial thoughts, having used them a little bit. So my initial thoughts of them as a comparison to the Games Workshop contrast range, and we can see some of the effects that they have and how they may differ, and also bring up some of the chatter that's been online. So I know when they initially were sent out to painters, there was an awful lot of very, very positive reviews, and then there was this bit of a secondary wave of painters that were claiming that there was a minor issue with them, as that they reactivated when you tried to paint over the top of them. And I want to talk a little bit about that. And it's not something that's it's not something there's nothing in it. They definitely can reactivate, but it seemed to be super positive for a while, and then there's alarm bells, there's this major flaw, and without spoiling the whole video, I think my initial experience with them is, if you're careful, you may not have issues. It really depends on how they use them. But anyway, let's talk you through what I'm painting, and we'll get started. And I'll just ramble on as I paint, and hopefully by the end of the video you'll get a bit of an idea about my thoughts on these paints. So here I have two officers from Warlord Games. Now these are their Epic Battles Waterloo campaign range British officers, so brigadiers or colonels, and I'm going to be using them for my own army. I needed to paint a couple up for a project that I'm in the middle of at the moment, which I'll be using in a future video. I thought they were a prime example of showing you how I can use some of these new paints as a comparison, maybe to what I would do before with the Citadel contrast ones. So I've got the basic set. When I picked this up, this was all that was available. I think as I'm recording this now, the mega set will almost be available. I'm not going to pick that up just yet. I haven't used the brush. Nothing wrong with the brush. I just have a brand that I prefer. This will definitely go into my sort of scenery and basing brush. It's not got a brilliant tip on it, these ones. They are good workhorse brushes, but it's a monster brush. Yes, you want to be able to put paint on quite thickly with these, but also these, as you'll see in a moment, they're quite runny. So without a fine tip, you lose even more control. So I'm not sure that maybe was the best brush to go with the set, but not useless. And then you've got 10 colours with this first starter. So you've got Pallid Bone, Crusader Skin, Zealot Yellow, Blood Red, High Lord Blue, which I hoped was going to be the answer to an alternative to Ultramarine Blue. We'll come back to it in more detail, and I'll show you it's a little bit light. It's probably a little bit closer to Talisar Blue, the contrast paint. And you've got Hive Dweller Purple, Grey Lord Grey, which seems to be somewhere between the Basilicanium Grey and the black contrast paint, somewhere in the middle. Still very good. Hardened Leather, which I've used a little bit, and it's really, really nice. Orc Skin, it's quite a bright green, again a little bit bright for some of the uses I need at the moment. and then you got Fire Giant Orange, which I've not actually tried yet. So you get a nice little range. Some of the colours I'll most be interested in are probably in the mega set, and that's just the way I paint and the way I use these over a Zenithal highlight. I'm quite often using them to base coat a miniature, which I then highlight again afterwards, and some of these colours are maybe a little bit bright for that to work for some of the applications I'm using it for. So I talked very briefly about Zenithal, so if you have come across this video and you've not been watching my other ones, I am assuming a lot of this is people that have already seen my painting tutorials and are interested in this. But this is a primed miniature that it looks like it's just white, but what I have done is I've primed it black first, and I've done a top down with the airbrush using white, and I have left some natural shadow. It doesn't pick it up too brilliant on the camera, and what it means is when you apply a glaze or you apply a contrast or a speed paint over the top, it really aids that natural shadow effect that you get from those paints. So I'm going to start with Hardened Leather here, and I want to show you the viscosity compared to, I suppose, its closest comparison, which would be Gaul Grunter Fur, and it's quite significant really, and that's both good and bad. You might be able to see it very well on the palette there. And this runs much more naturally than the other. Both good colours. I think the runnier speed paint is really good because it really flows into the recesses and helps provide that shadow, which is what you want when you're painting these single coats. But what it does take away is control, and I think you need to take your time if you want to be neat. And a lot of using these kind of one coat paints is that you don't want to get it in the areas that you don't need it, whereas more traditional style painting, you just paint over it, but you have to blank them back out again. And if you spent time doing a Zenithal prime and you've put some natural shadow in there, you can lose the qualities in that by doing that. So you maybe do need to be a little bit more careful for larger areas like this. I mean, this is a small model. This is, for those of you that aren't familiar with the range, it's Warlord's own scale. It's actually 13.5mm to the eye. So for those of you that are only used to 28mm models, this is closest to a 15mm model. So they're quite small, but even again on this kind of size, you've got enough control. A little bit harder when you're trying to do something like a belt or something at this kind of size. In terms of 28mm model, might not notice the issue quite as much. So the next kind of comparison will be the Grey Lord Grey versus Basilicanium Grey and Contrast Black Templar, just so you kind of see how they compare to each other. Now again, you've got that very runny consistency compared to the contrast paints. The Basilicanium Grey here, you obviously can't tell too much on the palette, but that is a little bit lighter. And then you've got your Black Templar, which is thicker and richer. Now they all have their place. If I just draw it across the palette there, you can see there's more of a bluey tinge to the Black Templar. Basilicanium Grey is very much a grey, and this, I'm guessing, is supposed to be their black. I haven't looked at the full list of all the others, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this black for the tail and mane on this horse, and we can see what it looks like, and we can start to see whether there's a reactivation problem as this paint touches the edge of where the hardened leather is, and there shouldn't be, because this is the most basic way you'd use these paints. So it should give me a slightly darker grey than I would get with the Basilicanium, and it's a fairly pleasing colour. And overall it's pretty good, controls quite well. It is quite runny again. It would concern me maybe doing the the straps and things, I think I could do it. It's definitely not as easy as the contrast colour is for it, but that seems to work quite well. Now over to the other model. Now this horse is going to be a white or a very light grey, and I don't have the speed paint version of the white yet, so I've used some contrast apothecary grey over the Zenithal. So I'm going to go into the horse's mane again. Now I might at this stage normally go with the skeleton horde, and I'm going to be using the pallid bone. Now let's see how they compare. I'm not going to compare every paint in this way, but I want to do a bit of a mix between comparisons and then how they react once you start highlighting afterwards. So this is the pallid bone. It's quite a rich colour, got a little bit more warmth to it than the skeleton horde there. So for me, providing that they both work okay, and I know skeleton horde works okay, it actually provides me with a slightly different colour. It's more of a yellow, got much more yellow in it here, much stronger tone. So again, it's going on quite well. Doesn't seem to be having any problems right next to the just painted on contrast paint. Now, one of the next most obvious comparisons for those of you who have followed my epic battles Waterloo tutorials, specifically the British, will be red, and the Blood Angels contrast red is an extremely good paint. So I don't really need to find a substitute, but it's definitely interesting for those of you that may be looking to buy one of these ranges. You may decide to go with one or the other. So let's look at the blood red again. We go back to this viscosity thing there. You can see that run by itself on to the palette, whereas this is an awful lot thicker and looks very different. Now this red here I've used on these miniatures and then highlighted afterwards, so I'll be very, very happy with it, and that's probably what I'll stick to because it matches the army. I will paint this jacket using the new red. We'll say this officer has gone to a different tailor, has gone somewhere else to get his wares made, but as you can see, it goes on very well, and it is a beautiful colour. So very impressed with it, and in terms of colour, it's definitely an either or for me. Both things work extremely well. Now the next paint I wanted to look at was High Lord Blue. I feel that it's somewhere in between contrast ultramarine and contrast Talisar Blue, which I've used both during the project, so I'm not going to compare it colour wise because it clearly is different. And I've seen different applications for it. It comes out very rich like that. It's a beautiful colour. But if you paint it on quite thin, you get something more electric-y like the Talisar Blue. If you have it quite thick, you get something a little bit deeper and richer. Now I've decided to paint this gentleman's jacket in it as a bit of a test, and maybe I'll make him an engineer officer or something like that. But just to give you guys a bit of an idea of what the colour is like, I think it's a little bit too light really to be your kind of your darker royal blue jackets, but again, one officer slightly different, maybe his jacket's faded or something like that. For want of trying it, it's not going to be the end of the world, and I'm looking forward to trying I think it's called Cloudburst Blue. There's definitely a darker blue in the full range when it's available, and I will be trying those, and maybe I'll do a part 2 video. But I'm pretty happy with the blue. It's a really nice blue. Yes, it is a little bit too light, but it's a nice blue in itself, and I'm sure it will be perfect for some regiments or whatever. Depends what you're painting at the time, doesn't it? Now here we are with the first potential issue, and we come across with the reactivation. Now I've changed my mind on what colour I want to paint an area of this model, and I've tried to paint over what is dry to the touch colour, and it has reactivated and bled through, and you can see that on the collar there. I've tried to paint over it in this grey here so I can put another colour in, and we'll see what it's like on the second coat. But for those of you that followed my tutorials and you want to touch up an area where you've just got the wrong colour on, I mentioned that a little bit earlier on, you could run into trouble, because if it reactivates and runs and you end up with a pink there rather than just a grey over the top, then yeah, it's not going to work in the way we want it to. Let's try it out on a little area here. So I've overspilt a little bit here with the red from the sash. I just want that to be grey again, ready for it to have a nice clear place to put a grey coat on afterwards, or black coat on afterwards rather. We'll see if it comes through. And there you are, you can see reactivation. Hopefully you can see that on the camera. So there's definitely something happening with the reactivation, and you've just watched me paint the grey on there and it's already soaking back through and we have pink. So as nice as the colour is, there are some issues here in the way you use them. That means you can't make a mistake, and if you want to fix that mistake by painting another colour over it, chances are it's going to bleed through, which is a bit of a shame really. So let's put that to a side, pop this one back on, and the red's had a little while to dry now. Let's highlight them in the same way as I would normally, because if it's going to bleed over when you're trying to blank them back in again, technically it will reactivate with highlighting, and maybe it won't show up so much. But so I'm using Evil Sun's Layer Scarlet, which is the same layer, the same highlight that I used. I'm just putting it out straight out of the pot as a bit of a tester, but the same colour as I use over the Blood Angels contrast red. And we'll see if I can highlight this red as I would normally, and whether it causes any issues. Now I've stormed ahead there and kind of carried on with the stuff without me rabbiting on too much, and I've stuck to Citadel contrast for the black on the horses' reins and the hats and the hooves and little things like that, and boots, and if you can see, this is another sort of 10 minutes on from the last time we talked about it, that area that I'd painted over with grey cere, that red is seeping back through even more for this pink collar, so that mistake I made with thinking, oh, I'm going to need a red collar, and then change my mind of thinking, so this guy's going to be a Peninsular era Royal Engineer, think of Hogan in Sharp, and it should have a black collar. So I thought, well, I'll go back and with grey cere, and then I'll use black Templar, but we have pink again now, and that just shows how much the reactivation. So I'm going to do it one more time. Let's have a look. Let's see if now it'll stop being a problem. Maybe you'll get the problem more with some colours than others. I've had no problem painting in black around some of the other speed paint areas I've used, where the colours have met, they've not bled into each other or anything like that. But I just want to change the colour of this, and it would be very strange that if you make an error you couldn't then paint over it with white or something afterwards, without the colour bleeding through. It just seems a bit of an own goal really. The whole point of these is that they are speed paints, and if you're unable to touch of a mistake, or you have to wait 24 hours for it to fully dry, so you can see the paint coming it's coming back through again already. If you have to varnish in between each thing, then you can call them speed paints all you want, they're not going to work maybe for this kind of scale and this way of painting. Now, don't get me wrong, I think they're going to have their uses, and there's some lovely colours, and I can see me using them through the airbrush and in methods that I think they go through the airbrush very well actually, so I can see uses for them for other things, but I've got my concerns for using them with this kind of small scale miniatures painting the way that I do for a lot of the tutorials on the channel. It's a shame, because some of the colours are really, really, really nice. So I have added in some High Lord blue here, And I'm going to do a risky thing, and I'm going to try out their yellow for a bit of a change, and paint the edges of the blanket there, and we'll see whether there's any bleed over. I'm risking the model, I suppose. At this point I can always wait for it to fully dry and put on a bit of varnish, and then I'm repainting white anyway, so it's not going to ruin it completely. But let's see. Let's do another test to see if it's a problem with the red more than other things. The highlighting with the red afterwards hasn't seemed to be a problem, so it's not always a problem of putting any colour over the top, but it definitely, if you want to put a lighter colour over the top, the bleed through is concerning at the moment. Now with the Citadel contrast yellows, I've painted the stripe on the trouser. This is just too thin. I'll move the palette back this way. As we talked about earlier, the viscosity, it's too thin to have that control, and that's not a complaint. That these are different products. That's what it is. But it's a little bit too thin for the control on that. What I do like with the contrast is because of that thicker viscosity, you can thin it. You can use it as a very thin glaze, but you can also paint some of them on in a different way, whereas this is so thin that it probably reduces the number of applications that you could do with it. It goes on okay at the moment. It's not bled in with the blue, so again, mixed results really. Certain things are okay. Get something red in the wrong area and you're definitely in trouble. So funnily enough, I've gone back around and touched up using the greys here again over the blue, and it seems to have covered over the Hylor blue fine. None of the problems that we saw with the blood red, which is interesting. So it shows that maybe the reactivation problem is worse with some colours than others. I'm going to try a couple more highlights now. I have put 2 more layers of grey over this red, and it keeps coming back through, so I'm probably just going to have, they're going to be black anyway, so I'm probably just going to have to paint standard black on, and yeah, that will do the job, but it's a shame. So a couple of things now. I'm going to see, this should be fine. Can't see any issues with this. This is Phalanx Yellow. I'm just going to highlight the edges here, and this is obviously over the Zealot Yellow from Speed Paint. I don't foresee any issues. I think if you're putting small amounts of paint and highlighting over a similar colour, I'm guessing if there is any reactivation, it's minor and won't really show up. So in that sense, it does work. I mean, these paints aren't useless. And which is good, because some of them are absolutely beautiful colours, but it definitely leaves you thinking. You're definitely not as confident that once you put a paint down, it's going to stay there and behave itself. And that blood red, which is such a beautiful colour, definitely leaves me a little bit concerned. So there's no issues there. That yellow's gone over fine. So I'll test another highlight. I won't do too many more. I wanted to highlight the tan horse and see how that works. So we have some orange brown here from Model Colour, which is I normally use this on my wet palette, but we'll make do with this for now. I just want to try and do some subtle highlights here, and this is the Hardened Leather colour, and just see whether there's any problems highlighting straight over the top of this, whether there's any reactivation. And fingers crossed they're not, because I quite like that Hardened Leather, and for horses it seems to give a slightly duller tone, which is what you want on your horses. Gore Grunt is lovely, but that seems to work better on leathers and things. Early signs are it's fine. Well, I'm not going to continue painting these miniatures on camera as such. It was never supposed to be a painting tutorial, so I'm going to leave it here. It was mainly exploring the speed paints that I had, and how well they would compare with the existing ranges of Citadel contrast that I've been using, and kind of explore some of the good points and some of the concerns that other painters have raised around that kind of colour bleeding and reactivation and things like that. And for anyone that's found this video who is new to the channel, it's odd. It's an odd video. It was very much aimed at existing subscribers who watch my painting tutorials for miniatures in this scale, who have been following the process that I've used with the Zenithal highlights and the contrast glazes, and then highlighting on top. Like I said at the beginning, because so many people had asked me whether I'd be switching to these speed paints or using them as well, and do I think they're better, etc. Well, do I think they're better? No, I don't. I think they're very good. I think they've got their own uses. I think in many ways they might be a little bit trickier to use. So they're thinner, so they require greater brush control. They're harder to get into small areas, and then you have that slight kind of inconsistency with how they'll react. So we saw that the problem with the red reactivating more than other colours, but the blue was fine when I went back over it with the grey. So that kind of inconsistency of not knowing what's going to work and what's going to cause you issues, you could buy the Citadel range and you're not going to have those problems, as much as they're more expensive. Anyone that didn't have either set right now, I'd say it's much safer to go and start with the Citadel contrast range, which is a shame because the Army Painter stuff is that little bit cheaper, but in many ways I think they've become maybe more of an advanced user's paints. That's just at a very first sort of stab at it. You can definitely highlight over it that it doesn't reactivate every colour. That's not the case. I've highlighted over the brown, I've highlighted over the blue, no problems at all. And maybe when you're using a lighter shade of the colour that you started with, you're not likely to notice the problem anyway. I haven't noticed any bleeding when I've put one colour next to the other, so they're not reactivating too much as the edges. The major problem has been that red so far, but it does put me, concerns me a little bit about being halfway through a model, choosing a colour, and then suddenly have an issue that ruins it or requires a lot of time to fix it. So I'd see no reason to make a big change. Saying that, I will use colours from this range. Will I go out and buy the mega set now? Probably not, actually. It's definitely on my shopping list, which will be removed now, and mainly because the Citadel contrast range works fine, and because of that kind of unknown element of whether I'm going to have an issue with certain things, I will pick these paints up colour by colour as and when I think I want to give one of them a try, and if I find they work fine and there's no reactivation or very little, it doesn't cause a problem, then I will happily use it and recommend it. But at the moment I don't see any reason to make the change, especially with those concerns in mind. And if you don't have either set, I would definitely go with the contrast for now. I will use these. I won't be throwing them away. I can see plenty of uses for them. I think they'll go fantastically through the airbrush, and the processes I use for that. And I'm not just talking, I paint all kinds of different things, not always just miniatures this size, and a lot of those processes will require varnishing in between stages or afterwards, and I think varnishing will solve the problem anyway, so you haven't got an issue there, and you can just enjoy the great colours that they seem to be. That's the sad thing, is that they are fantastic colours. But for now, yeah, definitely sticking with the contrast for this kind of range of models anyway, this style of painting. But anyway, a bit of an old video for those of you that have maybe found this because you're looking at contrast paints. As I mentioned at the beginning, it was very much aimed at my existing subscribers who have asked questions around whether I'd be switching, would I recommend them, because my painting tutorials for these epic range of models has used contrast quite heavily, so people are interested in my thoughts on them. I do use contrast for larger scale miniatures as well. They tend to be not for the whole model, tends to be for a certain area here or there. So again, maybe won't have the issues for those kind of things. We shall see. I will continue to use them, continue to learn, and maybe I'll do a part 2 video, or maybe I'll do a video based around using them for 28mm models. If I feel it's a relevant content, I will come back. But anyway, thanks very much for watching the video. Hopefully you found it useful one way or another. If you're interested in
what happens with these miniatures. So those of you that are here for the epic battle stuff, they will appear in the next Waterloo / Napoleonic vlog, because I do have uses in mind for these. But anyway, thanks very much for watching. Take care, and I'll catch you soon.